Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Last Thursday night, an oil refinery near LAX exploded, sending shockwaves through California's already fragile oil market. As if that wasn't bad enough, the federal government also shut down, which affects California more than you might realize. But among all of the chaos, I have very good news for you because there is one very practical step that you can take today to make our state better. California is in crisis, so today let's catch up on everything happening, what it means for you, and what you can do about it. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information and sources cited in compiling today's episode, then you should check out my corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. All right, so last Thursday at 9 p.m., a huge oil refinery in El Segundo, California, exploded and caught on fire, which then took hours to finally put out. It's not exactly clear what caused the fire because there still needs to be a full investigation into it, but it's looking like the blast originated in the hydrocracking unit, which means that they use hydrogen to turn heat into oil that's used for more like jet fuel or heavier types of oil. And so something went wrong there that then ignited the blaze. This refinery that exploded is the second largest refinery in California, and it's actually the second largest Chevron facility in all of the United States. It also accounts for 20% of all gasoline production across the state, as well as 40% of jet fuel that's used by Southern California airports. So that's huge. That's not a small amount. That's an entire fifth of our gas supply across the entire state that's now just offline because they need to clean up the damage. They need to figure out what went wrong and see how they can prevent it from happening again in the future. So when it comes to the immediate impact that this will have on Californians, early estimates cited an expected 30 to 90 cent per gallon increase in gas prices. And of course, this comes in the wake of the announcement of 2 closures of refineries in our state. One, I think, at the end of this quarter of this year, and then one early next year. And I have an episode on that, so you should go back and listen to that if you want in-depth analysis of the gas supply problem and gas prices in our state. But needless to say that when supply goes down, then demand is going to increase, and that increases prices because there is less gasoline available to Californians who need it. And so we can expect that at least in the short term, while this refinery is offline, again, to clean up whatever happened, that gas prices are going to increase once again. What led to this? Who is at fault, and could it have been prevented? Well, Chevron has a documented pattern of safety and environmental violations when it comes to this specific refinery. And so over the last 5 years, it's actually received 46 notices of violation, as well as 17 safety violations from OSHA. And so ultimately, we know that Chevron is going to be the one who bears responsibility for what happened to this refinery because they own it, they need to maintain it, and they should try to make sure that they are in line with all of the regulations in terms of safety for workers, as well as keeping their equipment up to date. However, I still think that it's important for us to ask the question, how in the world did they receive 46 violations and yet nothing was done about it? Why would you let a facility continue running if it's made that many errors over the last 5 years? So I looked into it, and how it works is that the South Coast Air Quality Management District, that is a mouthful, but that is a California state agency that oversees these refineries as well as other industries as well. They issue what are known as notices of violations, or NOVs. But an NOV doesn't lead to a facility being shut down. All that it does is it means that certain fines might be put in place, which the fines can actually be negotiated. There will be an action plan for the refinery to follow in order to get up to compliance. And then there's repeated ongoing monitoring, which is why they continue to have citations, is because they continue to go back to the facility again and again. And so even repeat violations, like we've seen with this refinery, won't lead to it being shut down. It just continues the cycle of being written in NOV. Maybe there's a fine, but again, maybe that fine can be negotiated. And so the problem persists. And so the question becomes, why wouldn't this state agency shut down the refinery? Why wouldn't they say, you have so many violations and you have OSHA violations as well, which have to do with people and workers. And so we're shutting this thing down until you come up to code. The problem is there is absolutely no incentive to do that because, like I mentioned, this refinery specifically accounts for 20% of all the gasoline produced in California. That's a huge amount. So to just take a refinery offline because of compliance violations and to reduce the gas supply by 20% is not going to be a popular choice. I'm sure that they are looking at it saying, well, we can't just stop production of gasoline. We need gasoline to be produced. And so we're just going to continue to hope that they will improve upon these compliance citations, that they will actually make the changes necessary as they continue running their operations. But unfortunately, we see that that didn't happen. And so what led to this environment where we are relying on one refinery for 20% of our gasoline supply? Well, it's something we've talked on the show about before, and that's the lack of competition that we have with oil refineries and gasoline production. California has taken the policy priority of environmental and climate change sort of policies. And because of that, they really have disincentivized oil refineries from being able to operate smoothly in the state of California. And so that's how we've gone from 40 oil refineries back in the 1980s, now down to just 13 that are operating today in 2025. And we'll be down to 11 next year when 2 oil refineries shut down for good. So going from 40 to 11 is a really drastic decrease. And that's because of the environment that our politicians, and again, our policies have created around producing gasoline in a state like ours. So when you rely so heavily on one company or on one facility to provide what most Californians need, because most Californians are not driving electric vehicles. Most people need gasoline to get where they need to go. When you rely so heavily on one producer to do that, you set yourself up for this type of situation where that facility might not be in compliance, but you feel like you can't do anything about it because if you do something about it, you get backlash, right? If you close the facility down, even temporarily to fix their violations, gas prices are going to increase. And that instability is not good for consumers. It's not good for everyday Californians. And so we just go on and on. That is what has led to a situation like this, where yes, Chevron is responsible, but the state of California really has driven what the root causes are behind this problem. So regardless of the details of this exact explosion and what really went wrong at the facility, we don't even need to know the details to know that our policies have created the environment in which oil refineries operate like this, and in which our regulatory bodies don't really even have any teeth to do anything when it comes to committing infractions. Now, speaking of the details of this event, it's interesting because we need an investigation into the root causes, like what caused the explosion and how can it be prevented. But that investigation might be delayed because you may have heard that the federal government has shut down. And the body that does the investigations into explosions like this is the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Mitigation Board, which is a federal government agency. And so that leads me to talk about our next topic of crisis in California, which is how the federal government shutdown affects us on a state level. So let's just start from the top. What causes the federal government to shut down? Well, Congress is supposed to pass 12 funding bills each year. And it's specifically 12 because that's one for each part of the federal government. The problem is, as you can imagine, in Congress, trying to pass spending bills is largely going to be contingent on what things you prioritize. And so Republicans might prioritize spending for things like the border, things like immigration enforcement, right? Some of those more tougher on crime policies. Democrats might want to prioritize spending for climate change or for other programs, maybe healthcare, that Republicans don't want to spend as much money on. And so in Congress, they have to agree and they have to pass these appropriations bills so that each year we know where the money in the federal government is going to be spent. Something you may have heard of, as I mentioned before, is a continuing resolution. What is that? Basically, what that means is it's a recognition that our government is not always going to just agree by the September 30th deadline. That's when our fiscal year ends in government, that they might need more time to negotiate. And so in order to give them more time, you can pass a CR, which will then allow certain spending at certain levels, but it's just temporary. And so Congress still needs to agree. The Senate and the House still need to ultimately pass those bills for the next year. So that's where we're at, is our government could not agree on the continuing resolution or on the spending bills. And so our government has shut down. This mostly impacts federal employees as well as federally run programs. And so in practicality of what it means that the government has shut down doesn't mean that everything just stops, but it does mean that federal employees will stop getting paid. So some federal employees who are designated as non-essential will be furloughed, where they're sent home without pay and they just have to wait out the shutdown. Other federal employees who are essential, some examples of that are Border Patrol, air traffic controllers, TSA, military, so on. They still need to be functioning. We can't just send all of our military home because the government shuts down. However, the unfortunate thing is they will not be paid until the shutdown ends. And so the biggest problem is that the longer the shutdown goes on, the more that states like California will start to really feel the ripple effect of those other consequences, like certain employees just not being paid. And there have already been repercussions in California specifically, even though we're just 1 week into the shutdown. And for example, on Monday of this week, the Hollywood Burbank Airport, which is near me, announced that it would be operating without air traffic controllers because they were so short-staffed. Because of that, then there might be flight delays, there might be less flights because they might just not have the resources in order to make sure that all planes can get up in the air safely. And so that's just one repercussion where you might not be a federal worker, you may not be affected, but maybe you have a flight planned during a government shutdown and maybe those plans get interrupted. Another example is there are delays in funding things like wildfire prevention, and this is super important for California. So again, the essential services are going to continue. Firefighters are still there. They're going to still fight the fires, and they still have funding for immediate needs that need attention or need resources. But it takes away from future funding. So the funding is going to halt, which means that future wildfire prevention is going to have less funds or less resources than it would have had, because any resources that they use today to fight the critical and current needs are going to draw from the well of resources that they have stored up for future wildfire prevention. And then, as I mentioned, there are national parks, so you might want to check on that if you were planning to go this weekend. The National Parks Conservation Association is projecting daily losses of $1 million in fee revenue for the parks and $77 million for the communities that surround them. So that's where we start to see a lot of the impact is really on the economy. So when there are certain programs like a national park that creates revenue, if it's closed, then it's not going to generate revenue. And then additionally, if people aren't going to visit the national parks, then the restaurants, the hotels, the shops, all of the things around the national parks are also going to see a drop in revenue as well. And so if the shutdown lasts for 2 days, might not be a big deal. If the shutdown lasts for 2 months, then we're going to see it start hitting those communities harder. Because if hundreds of thousands of employees are not being paid, then it means that those employees likely are not spending money. And when you spend money, that boosts the economy. When you don't spend money, that drags the economy down. And so again, that largely is going to be dependent on how long we're in a shutdown for. And so if it ends today, or if it ends by the time that this video is released, then it probably won't have affected us too much. But if it continues past, say, 35 days, that's how long the last shutdown lasted, that's a pretty substantial amount of time. That's over a month. And think, if you weren't going to get paid for a month and maybe you're the main provider for your household, that's pretty significant. You would have to be dipping into your savings most likely in order to pay the bills that month or to pay for groceries. And so you're not going to be going out and buying things that you don't need or just spending in the economy because you're a lot more strapped for cash. And so now you might be thinking, this is a federal issue, and so California doesn't really have anything to do with this, right? Maybe you're thinking, our state didn't contribute to this, surely, right? This is a federal government issue and Congress needs to agree. But I do want to point out one thing, and that is with this shutdown specifically, the heart of the conversation or the heart of the disagreement really is over healthcare. And that is because the Democrat Party wants to expand healthcare to be inclusive of everyone meaning also illegal or undocumented immigrants. Where has been a hotbed for paying for the healthcare of illegal immigrants? California. Our state is the heart of doing that. This is another topic that I talked about in a previous episode that you should go back and listen to if you're not aware of it. But our governor put us in a budget deficit last year, specifically to cover the costs of healthcare for undocumented immigrants. And so Democrats' proposal for a spending bill allocates $200 billion on healthcare for illegal immigrants. And really, this is taking a playbook right out of Newsom's agenda here in California, because he received a $3.4 billion loan from California's general fund, as well as immediate additional $2.8 billion in funding last year to cover over budget expenses that were incurred by our state's Medi-Cal program due to its expansion to cover the healthcare for illegal immigrants. So while California is not directly responsible for the government shutdown, and it largely is on Congress to be able to pass, it has championed and even put in place a lot of the policies that we are now seeing Democrats coming out saying that they want to be put in place on a federal level. And the worst part is that in the midst of this, Governor Newsom is coming out encouraging Democrats to stand strong on this issue, to not cave to the Republicans, which essentially means that the shutdown will just continue longer and longer. So on one hand, he criticizes President Trump and the administration for putting us in a shutdown. And on the other hand, he refuses to encourage his own party to actually negotiate and to maybe give up some of the more radical parts of their policies that the American people don't even want enacted. So it's just all a complete mess. But while California is just in constant chaos, your morning routine doesn't have to be chaotic, and that is thanks to 7 Weeks Coffee. 7 Weeks Coffee is a wonderful family-owned company with the mission to live out their Christian values in the marketplace while still providing you with a high-quality product. So did you know that large coffee distributors usually are selling you coffee that is laden with mold or pesticides or toxic chemicals, and at the same time, they are paying their farmers mere pennies on the dollar? 7 Weeks Coffee is completely different. They know the farmers that are growing your coffee. They use direct trade to make sure that they are paid fair and honest wages, and they make sure that all of their coffee is organically farmed so that it is mold and pesticide and toxin free, as well as being ultra low acidity. But the best part is their mission, because did you know that at 7 weeks in utero, a baby is the size of a coffee bean, which is just adorable to think about. And so they really want to honor and support life. That means that 10% of their sales go directly toward financially supporting pro-life pregnancy centers across the United States. So their heart really is for women and babies in our country who they want to help to be able to choose life and get the care and resources that they need. So if you love coffee and you love babies, then you should use my code TESSABRAHAM at checkout to get 10% off your order. This is one super practical way that we can show up in the marketplace to support companies that champion our values rather than supporting companies that are directly opposed to our values. So if you're ready to make the switch, instead of going to Starbucks and grabbing coffee from there, you should check out 7 Weeks Coffee today. Use my code TESSABRAHAM at checkout and you will get 10% off your order and you'll support the show. So when it comes to things like oil refineries exploding and federal government shutdowns, let's just be honest, there's not really much that we can do. We can always choose to elect better leaders. We should definitely be informed about these issues so that we're not deceived into thinking that the root causes are something different. All of those things are very important. But we can't really do much today to change anything. The good news is that I have one more story for you in which it is something that you can actually do today to make real change to make our state better. And that comes down to the midterm elections that are coming up next year. Now you might be thinking, Tess, what can I do today to help the midterm elections in 2026? Let me tell you, I got in the mail the other day a letter that was marked as urgent and needs to be addressed and filled out and returned immediately. So I was very intrigued by that. And I opened it and saw that it was actually a petition for a new ballot measure that was just approved to be able to start getting signatures to show up on the ballot. This is specifically coming from the group Reform California, and it is all centering around the idea of voter ID. Voter ID is, once again, another topic I've talked much about on this show, and I even have an episode debunking the claims that voter ID is racist or discriminatory, so please go check that out as well if you want more information there. But the good news is that Reform California has put together a ballot initiative that would require in California voter ID when you go to the polls in order to vote or when you go to register to vote. And that would just really safeguard to make sure that the people who are registering to vote are citizens of America, because that is what they should be in order to vote, as well as when you show up at the polls that you are who you say that you are. Now, our government and our governor and our legislature are currently very opposed to voter ID. They have even outlawed certain counties from being able to put their own voter ID requirements in as they see fit. They sued Huntington Beach for putting in voter ID requirements, even though voters there wanted it, all of that. But just because our governor and our legislature are against it does not mean that the people of California are against it. And in fact, in April of 2025, there was a new poll that was conducted that was of all registered voters in California. Over 71% of those polled were in favor of requiring voters to show ID when they register to vote. And there was still a majority who were in favor of requiring ID every time that you show up at the polls to vote. That is huge. 71% is huge. To get Californians to agree on anything in that size of a majority is pretty insane and tells us that people want this, that this isn't really split across party lines. There was a bit higher percentage in Republicans and lower percentage in Democrats, but even if the Democrats polled, over half of them, over the majority of them agreed that they thought that voter ID should be enacted. So this really shouldn't be something that should have to be passed through a ballot initiative. Our legislature and our governor should listen to us to say this is what the people of California want, but they're not listening. And so we need to show up and vote for it. But in order to vote for it, we need to get it on the ballot. So here's the encouraging news. You can sign the petition today to get this ballot initiative on the ballot so that when you show up to vote in November of 2026, you can check yes for this initiative and you can be part of enacting voter ID requirements across our state and really restoring the integrity of our elections here in California. We need 875,000 signatures by, I believe it's March, it might be January. So really there's not much time. Just in a few months, we need 875,000 signatures. And currently the initiative only has a little over 66,000. So every signature counts, yours included, and you definitely need to go check out Reform California's website of how to fill this out. You have to actually mail in your signature, so you need to download and print the petition, sign it, have other people around you sign it, and then mail it in, and you will contribute to being part of the initiative to get voter ID on the ballot, because that's what Californians want. Just as a side note, I have all of that information down below. So if you are interested, which you should be, and if you want to contribute, which you absolutely should, then please go to the link below in order to find all the information of how to sign that initiative. Here's the thing. California is just in crisis for so many reasons, right? We have the oil refineries, we have the federal government shutdown, we have terrible policies that Californians don't want in place. Regardless of that, we have so many more problems. We have high housing costs, we have high cost of living, we have high homelessness, we have crime. We just have so many problems all of the time that are consistently putting us in chaos and in crisis. We can't fix every one of them today. We can speak out, we can be informed, we can vote for better leadership, and I advocate that you do all of that. But unfortunately, there are some times where that's just not enough to make real change today. So we need to be looking for practical ways. What are the opportunities that come up for where we can actually do something practical that's going to contribute to real and effective change in our state? And this is one of those opportunities. From the refinery to the federal shutdown, California is continuing to pay the price for failed leadership. But this petition in your mailbox is a sign that we still have a choice, that we can still make a difference. So take that step today, sign the petition and mail it in, and make your voice heard on one simple issue that you actually can affect change over. Because, my friends, among the crisis and among the chaos, real change happens one step at a time. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you even learned something new. Just a reminder that if you want to sign that petition, and you absolutely should, that all of that information is linked for you below. Please spread the word and share this show with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.